Yeah, sure, Johnny. Yeah, thanks so much for having me on. My name is Ruane. I'm founder of Mind Data, a mental health tech startup that I started 7 months ago now.
And what sort of drove you down that journey? What made you think, hey, I want to go start my own company? Where did that sort of ambition come from?
Well, I guess you've got to rewind, or I've got to rewind back to 2015 when I suffered from suicidal depression and I was at university and I went through therapy with a counsellor at university, an amazing lady called Betty. She saved my life, changed my life. And it was during that time that I saw a quote from a US Marine that had attempted suicide in Iraq. And he said that his purpose was greater than his circumstances. And it really kind of like hit me between the eyes to say, well, Gandhi has a purpose. I mean, I don't. No one's ever asked me around like my purpose or life goals or anything. But it was quite enticing to think that if I had a purpose, should I ever slip back into circumstantial depression, I'll have something bigger to anchor myself to. So I chose a life goal of improving the mental health of 1 million people worldwide. And then maybe we can talk about it in more detail, but after I exited the last tech startup, I then thought, can I use my experience and love of tech and startups to speak to this problem of improving the mental health of 1 million people? So that's really where the seed started.
It's interesting. So you sort of experienced this yourself and thought, all right, there's a world here I could probably make better. Here's my purpose. And now sort of time is right. I've exited this company. Can I go and do this? Because I think that's an interesting for a lot of people is they have an idea, but they never know when to execute on that idea, when to make that leap, which is quite difficult. But for you, the circumstances just seemed to click, and it was almost the right time. That's what I'm hearing. How did you explore that problem further? How did you go, right, is this something I can solve, and where is the opportunity to solve it?
Yeah, I mean, firstly, you're absolutely right that I was very fortunate to have a natural chapter end. I mean, usually our chapters in life kind of blur in and out of one another. You know, I can kind of choose a date and a time when that chapter ended, when the acquisition was all wrapped up. So I stayed on at the acquiring company for 1 year as a director of customer success. And it was in the evenings and weekends that I started to build out the minimum viable product. But to rewind, to specifically think about what this product would be, because improving the mental health of 1 million people is such a wide scope. I mean, how on earth do you do that? So I just started with the experience that I had with therapy and the areas that I wish I could have improved. And there were two main areas that I started with. The first was the frustration I had at the start of every therapy session. The first 10 minutes for me was always quite a challenge when I was depressed, because I try and cram in a week's worth of emotions and events to Betty to try to make some sense of it so we could get into therapy. And so that was the first kind of problem or area of improvement that I wanted to fix if I could. And the other was memory. So usually, I suffer from recency bias. So you'd focus on what recently happened rather than necessarily what was most important, purely because of memory. Your memory severely impacted when you suffer from.
Interesting. It's like a real short-term view then.
It is really, yeah. I mean, I'm not a psychologist, but I think it's because certainly my experience of depression was I was generally so absent-minded that I wasn't kind of recording, life events as they were happening. My mind was elsewhere. So, things that happened 4 days ago seem to feel like they were 4 years ago, or maybe even never happened.
And yeah, it reminds me of when Google pops up and says, hey, you have this memory from a year ago, that's what you were doing. You're like, wow, that's where I was. So I can kind of see what you're saying. I guess most people are quite focused on what am I doing now, but I guess what you're saying is even worse when you're depressed. It's very short-term view. How did you decide to build a product for that then? So I can see where that problem is, but how did you go, right, how can I solve this? What solution should I take? Who should I even talk to about validating this with? I think this is quite a challenge here.
Yeah, hugely. I mean, there were so many early versions of that minimum viable product concept. I started to go down the route of building out like a chatbot, which was like a counsellor in your pocket kind of thing. And not only is the market relatively saturated with those kinds of self-help apps, counsellor in your pocket. I also struggled ethically because I thought, I don't know whether I'd have ever formed the level of relationship or connection with an algorithm that I would have with Betty. It didn't feel right to me. So I was like, I'm going to abandon that. So I eventually just created a digital journal on Bubble, a low-code app or a no-code app, just to get something out there that looked half polished. And started to speak to any therapist I could get my hands on. So I spent a few years on Instagram, just putting out my own confessions around mental health, depression, things like that. So I built up a very small kind of ecosystem of people that had been through therapy, a few therapists, and thankfully it kind of propagated out. And I was introduced to one therapist in Stanford called Fran, and I feel like I just struck gold, really. She happened to be a really forward-thinking therapist, really open-minded to technology. And we just ran with that together. And I said, can I put this in your hands? Can you just run with it with a few of your clients? I just want to know if this harebrained idea actually makes therapy more effective. And so that's how I started with that momentum.
Wow, so you actually got to test it with an expert and with people? So you got direct
very
feedback.
lucky. Very lucky. Yeah.
And did you get to interview those clients that she was taking? Because I imagine that's quite a difficult user interview to do if you had to say to someone, hey,
yeah,
can I have feedback, but let's not go into too much detail.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, and client confidentiality is paramount here. So the first bits of feedback that I had, Fran was the gatekeeper. So I was receiving this anonymous feedback through Fran. So client 1, client 2 kind of thing. So that was quite a safe way of me getting meaningful feedback, but in a very safe way. I had no idea who these people were, but they were using it. So that was quite a convenient way of using Fran as a gatekeeper in the early.
So you spoke to Fran. You've got an expert involved, which I think is probably is a good thing to do there when building such a product that has fairly sensitive data, but then very much expertise is needed. So I can see why you take that approach. What did you do after that? What was your next step to say, right, I've built this MVP? What did you do then? How do you take that product even further?
So I guess the minimum viable product itself kind of adapted alongside the commercialization concept of this, because even though I had this kind of great tool that was starting to prove really valuable for therapy. I mean, Fran with her clients were shaving off time and building up a deeper relationship because they're not hitting the micro reset every session, if you will. You're kind of building on what's happened in the week. But I then started to think, well, is this something that people would pay for? And Fran actually said that she would, because it would, on the output, it would increase advocacy. It's something that her clients would be able to speak about. It would also, on the front end, give her a competitive advantage. There's so many kind of within reason, similar age, similar experience, similar price range of therapists. And you just have to fit the one that matches your personality. Having something that you can stand out helped. But it was when I was talking to her, I thought, well, how do you run your business? Is there an opportunity here? And I realized that most therapists, not all, but most kind of have disparate ways of managing. They'll keep patient notes on pen and paper. They'll maybe use their own Outlook calendar. They might use Google Docs. They might use Word document. And so I thought there might be a nice way. I've already created a dashboard for Fran to view her clients and their inter-session insights. Maybe I can just pull those kind of processes in so you can invoice, schedule, securely capture your notes and see the insight in just one place, And that started to really kind of build up a bit of momentum to say, okay, I'm kind of solving or improving areas of both the client and counselor, their lives here. So the first thing was my partner, she's from South America. So I built it in English and Spanish. and put it in the hands of an Argentinian therapist as well, because I wanted to see if this would, relatively speaking, internationalize, if that's the right word, to see if it would extend across borders.
Two markets at once.
Yeah, just proving a concept. Yeah, because what I didn't want to do was build something that was, you don't know the cultural nuances. And so I wanted to make sure that I was building something that was kind of neutral and fitted therapy rather than fitted the UK kind of thing. Thankfully, it did. It's quite new. It's quite universal, which helped. So that was the momentums are starting to expand on the minimum viable product.
Yeah, I think it's quite brave to go for two markets at once, especially when it's in another language, right?
Yeah,
to get feedback and if that was like so culturally different, to try and interpret that feedback and say, is there a problem? But then I'm guessing, well, my assumption would be that a lot of people have the same or have problems in the world, and there is a therapy, so there is like a standard model there. So that's I guess what you're clicking into. And then you've discovered this problem. Can I make them more efficient? Can I make the therapist's life more efficient at the same time? So you're almost tackling two users, two types of therapist and the actual client.
Mm-hmm.
How have you decided to prioritize and say, all right, I'm really going to focus now on the therapist user more. I'm going to focus more on the client user more. How have you sort of prioritized it if you're going along?
Well, I think that, again, it had its roots in the commercial model of it. I thought I'm quite at home with a SaaS model with the tech company before Mind Data. It seemed like a natural fit for me to go down that road. And I thought, well, it's going to be much harder to target end clients going through therapy, effectively saying, hey, that money you're spending in therapy, I can make your life better for just a low price of X. It seemed conceptually a harder sell. So I thought, well, let me double down on how I can improve advocacy, improve effectiveness, improve the efficiency of the business of a therapist. The platform I built isn't a therapy platform. It never will be. It needs to get out of the way of human therapy. So following the commercial model helped me double down on saying the primary target here is the therapist. For every, one feature that I've built for a client, there are 4 or 5 for the counselor. So that naturally helped me lean towards who's buying it, who should be having the most value from it effectively. And
on that note of the SaaS model, so I guess they'll be paying sort of a monthly subscription to use this or yearly. How have you, because in multiple markets, have you looked into sort of pricing points yet and how to establish that? You don't have to sort of reveal where you're at, but how the methodology you're deciding to do that with?
Yeah. So, well, I mean, in terms of the actual growth model, now that I'm a fully fledged kind of startup, if you will, I will be primarily focusing on the UK to actually launch and get a foothold. So, although I've proven the kind of the concept and I feel like the principles that it's built on are, roughly speaking, universal, that helped me kind of rest easy at night knowing that should and when we expand, we're pretty much ready. But initially, it's going to take so much time, energy, and money to, as you said earlier, grow instantly in North America, South America, and the UK, for example. It would be very difficult. So initially, we will just be focusing on the UK. And in terms of the pricing point, it literally just started very simply with Fran, the counsellor. How much do you spend on, other types of business tools? Your accountancy tool, for example. Anything else that you might be using, and then put that in the context of how much you charge per hour. And then so we basically came to a middle ground of understanding what a sensible price per week would be. And I actually then went lower than that, actually. The reason why I went lower is I know that we're going to be taking these clients on a cultural change, a change management journey, digitizing what they do. Although, in my view, the benefits far outweigh the friction, the challenges. I think in that first year, 18 months, I needed to take price off the table. I needed to get traction and get people using it, and we can revisit the pricing model later. So very simply, I just chose £25 a month. Keep it super simple. We're not charging per client per month. It's £5 or so a week. It's really not very much. Just to take that off the table. So that's how we've got to that initial pricing point, quite simply and non-scientifically.
That's an interesting approach, though. So it's you sort of asked the expert again, what are you paying, what's your hour, and then trying to come to a price point between there. Yeah, I could imagine doing that in two markets at once would be quite complicated. Mm-hmm. What I would like to then touch on is, you mentioned growth. How are you finding new therapists to take this on board? Because I always found doing outreach is always the most nervous thing to do, is to knock and say, hey, can you use my products? How have you approached that?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think this is where the rubber hits the road, and this is the hardest, most anxiety-inducing part of the journey, and I do find it quite stressful, actually. So I think there are two parts to the way I've been handling this. The first is I just relentlessly and annoyingly reached out to therapists on LinkedIn, Instagram, and just framed it of, I just want 15 minutes of your time for feedback. I was so nervous to say, do you want to test it? Do you want to use it? Just, I didn't want them to write me off within a DM to say, I haven't got time, next. But most people are willing to give feedback, provide their expertise, on the concept. And I had hoped that, well, maybe a portion of the people, it might spark their interest to say, actually, can we test this? So that was initially how I started to kind of reach out to more people. But the most value I got was actually understanding the reasons why they may not use it, or the kind of questions they were asking are usually a telltale sign of their fears and their trepidations. And most of them were around two things: data security and time. This sounds like I may be spending more time prepping for a session than less. Why on earth would I do that? Or, I've never had my paper filing cabinet hacked, Sean. This sounds like a big risk. So that was something that I thought, before I really start to expand with a go-to-market strategy, I need to have answers to these. I really need to focus on these two things. So the first person I brought in was Jan Zambrini, who was our old data protection officer at ClearReview, to say, we need to start building a first version of Mind Data that we can confidently talk about the data security. I can't with a minimum viable product, so I cannot run with this at scale. We've got one shot to get our name out there, and this isn't the way. So really, over the summer, it's been build phase, speaking to those fears, making sure that the product that I've got is speaking to those challenges and those fears.
That makes sense. You can't sort of mess up data with your MVP, because your credibility is gone then, right? If that's such a fear, you've got to address that, which I guess makes it quite complicated when building, to say, right, well, we need a fairly well polished product because the expectation is so high from the users here. Whereas I'm guessing naturally you were like, I'd love to get something out a lot quicker, testing, and then we can address this. But that sounds like quite a challenge, actually. But you seem to have got past that. Where are you taking the product next then? What's the next avenue?
So the product is just about finished now. So it's going through initial kind of user acceptance testing. And I would still actually class it as a minimum viable product. I mean, I know it's technically not, but I think it really comes down to the V in MVP. Realistically, with the problem that I'm speaking to, the world that I'm entering into, really the thing that I built on Bubble wasn't even viable, because you can't use it really because of the encryption, data security, accessibility. You can't. So it's kind of a pre-MVP model, if you will. So this MVP version 1 is due to be released this month, and then we can start to really run with putting it in the hands of therapists. And that's where I think my second challenge came in. Whilst I brought in an expert in Jan to help oversee the build and getting the right levels of data, data security by design. When we were going through this build, talking about products, something I would say and I'm very passionate about is for me, the user experience came second. The data security was number one. We'll make user flows and user experience work around that. I didn't want to compromise on data security by making it easier. There is a fine balance, of course, but I started with the most extreme and then worked backwards rather than, okay, let's get the minimum and then build on top, because it's easier to undo things than add things in later. Trying to encrypt something that was never encrypted is much harder than decrypting something and letting it out, if you will. So that really helped. And the other piece that I realized was, well, I need some credibility to mine data. I've been through therapy. I've been through a tech scale up and exit. I feel the product has got good, solid grounding. But in the psychology community, I don't. No one cares who I am. I'm just some guy that went through therapy. So then I thought I need to make sure that I've got someone with some really good credibility behind them. And so that's where I brought on Helena, the Chief Science Officer. So I think that with the product being underpinned by an expert, and now the kind of the ethos and our brand being underpinned and validated by a psychology expert, that gives us a really good foundation to start to run out into the world and form partnerships, be more present at exhibitions and conferences.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting approach there. As you said, you're not an expert in this, but you've done, I guess, the next best thing of bringing someone in that is. So you've got these two experts. They've helped you build the product. You say you're ready now to really bring on these users. Are you going to go down the avenue that some startups do and say, right, let's get some big VC money in or some large funding in to try and scale quickly? Are you going to take the approach of, let's bootstrap this as long as we can, let's bring in some therapists and take that avenue, bit of mix of both? Mm-hmm. How are you approaching this?
I think probably a mix of both, Johnny, to be honest, at this point. What I want to do is the next thing is I've proven the concept. I know that conceptually it works. We've got great advocacy from the beta testers, if you will. What I want to do now is prove the commercialization of this, start to get early revenue. And it doesn't have to be massive. You set aside and say, what does validation look like to us? You set some KPIs. And you say, if we hit these, this is what we all agree is validated, commercially viable. So that's what I'm going to be using pre-seed to do. Nothing major, nothing massive. Once we've proven that, that's where, come seed, I start to look for probably quite significant investment from VC to then scale and run with it very quickly. That's kind of the approach that I'm going to take at this point, I think.
And how's your pitch?
How do I pitch?
Yeah, how is your pitch? I see on LinkedIn you've been doing some preparation for it. So yeah. Have you found that? What a journey! Like, what an experience to go through pitching. If you could just stand there and pitch like you would at school with a presentation and sit down, it would be pretty easy. As we all know, I mean, the pitch really is the bit where you finish and say, any questions? That's the bit that you can't really rehearse for so much. And that's the bit that really tests your mettle, I think. So I feel quite at home with creating a slide deck, with walking through and presenting, quite at home with that. And I guess as a founder, you just have to be. It's part of the beast. Knowing every part of your business is crucial. You should be able to speak at a pretty in-depth knowledge on every part. How is it encrypted? The data security? What's the tech stack? What are your revenues? What are your forecasts? What percentage you'll be spending on marketing? Why? There's so many avenues that you kind of walk in and just have to carry in your head. You feel like you're balancing. So I found it really nerve-wracking, scary, petrifying, exciting. I've enjoyed it as much as I've been nervous. I mean, it's definitely forced me to grow in so many different ways so far. But the net effect is I'm enjoying it. I'm enjoying the growth, I'd say. Yeah, it is that classic cliche of so many hats could not be more true, right? Especially early stage when you have to do everything. Well, that's cool. I'm actually really looking forward to see where you go with this. I think you're probably in a very good place. Probably it's a very passion-led founder. So yeah, I wish you the best of luck in all that.
Thanks, Johnny. Yeah, fingers crossed. I do feel passionate about it. I am confident in the team and the product. I am, yeah. But you've got to stay grounded, stay humble, and keep learning, and just keep listening to customers. So thank you.
Cool. And hopefully in a year's time, have you on again when you're now the biggest startup in the world.
That'd be amazing. Yeah, yeah. I'd love that, Johnny. Perfect.
Yeah. Cool. All right, mate.